5 rules of propaganda. Propaganda, information which is false or emphasizes just part of a situation, used by the government or political group to make people agree with them. So today's presentation is actually on the 5 rules of propaganda. So here we have Edward Bernays, who is the godfather of propaganda. And he said propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government. So he was a pioneer in the field of public relations and propaganda, and he is referred to actually as the father of public relations. And he was named as one of the most influential Americans of the 20th century. Some notes about this presentation. Today's meeting will be on the 5 rules of propaganda. There is a course developed and being uploaded each week to the website. This will form part of that. This is being recorded and accessible to all. So relax, allow yourself to learn about propaganda a little more. You can rewatch. The word propaganda first appears in 1689. It comes from the Latin phrase Congregatio de Propaganda Fidei. This is congregation for the propagation of the faith. The term obviously implies conveying information to the public, information that should be saluted for that which it is not perceived by the informant as untrue, but rather as an expression of the only existing truth. So its original term is actually to convey truth. Its connotation and context in today's world is actually that it's conveying only part of the truth, or in fact lies. And this was from Alexandra Igorlescu at the University of Craiova, Romania. So how did we get here? How did we get into today's climate? How do people believe the things that they believe? So if we take Joe Bloggs, who's one of the examples on the project, he will be receiving most of his information from the media. And as Cheryl Atkinson pointed out in her book Slanted, a lot of this is actually corporate media now and follows a certain narrative. Ofcom in the UK restrict certain information that can be presented on the media. So again, that's going to be further sort of filtered and slanted towards whatever Ofcom chooses or pressure to choose. Cheryl Atkinson also coined the term astroturfing, which is the fact that some big companies have so much resources available to them that are able to basically influence certain studies, medical studies, Wikipedia, for instance, and many other online information sources. Obviously, social media has a lot of censoring going on at the moment. We have the Behavioural Insights team in the UK, which effectively designed documents and the nudge continuum. And one of the documents that they produced was Mindspace. And as you can see there, influencing behaviour through public policy. We have the 6 principles of influence. We're actually 7 now. So what you have is the average member of the public is being subjected to information that is presented in such a way to coerce them to form an opinion. And this is why some very famous documentary was coined Manufacturing Consent. Where do the rules of propaganda fit in to the previous slide that we looked at? So Norman Davies wrote a book, Europe, A History, and he coined the 5 rules of propaganda. And these rules act as a style in which the propaganda is presented. And today we're going to look at those 5 rules and look at examples of them. So the first one is known as the rule of simplification. And that is reducing all data to a simple confrontation between good and bad, friend and foe. And if we look at some examples in the current narratives within the media, we will see that on the good side is the heroes risking their life on the front line. And we've got on the bad side, those being disrespectful for questioning policies, straight black and white. And obviously this meme shows that the heroes weren't really protected by the governments. And then we have the selfless scientists working for humanity. And then obviously those people watching YouTube on the toilet. So again, it's presented as very black and white. So anyone doing any research is in a lab, and anyone questioning anything is basically checking their iPhone on the toilet. And of course, as we know, a lot of information can be bought nowadays. Then some other examples, I am following the science, so that would be someone that's pro-vax, and anyone that questions anything is labelled as an anti-vaxxer. There doesn't appear to be anything in between. So if you had somebody that's pro-vax questioning a specific one that's new, how can they then be an anti-vaxxer if they're by nature a pro-vax person? So this is just, and I'm not going to say what my opinions are on there, because really this is just highlighting how it's just presented in black and white. And of course what you'll have is that the person will say effectively anyone that's pro-vax uses science, and anyone that's anti-vax is obviously anti-science, and it's not this black and white. And there are so many very able experts who are posing valid questions. And of course, one that's very fascinating is the, so you're anti-COVID. Now, what does this mean? Does this mean that the other person's pro-COVID? So effectively, it's the simplification into good and bad. And obviously, the world does not work this way. So, COVID deniers, anti-vaxxer Karens, and they're saying, if you're not this, then you're actually a sane person. And of course, the 2 legs good, or it's actually 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. And then, of course, we're portrayed as being the vaccine to be good and COVID to be very bad. So you're going to want to move from one to the other. There's certain things that have to happen for this. So ivermectin has to be bad, HCQ has to be bad, and therefore people move towards the vaccine. And what is happening in today's world is that people are not allowed to question these. And that is in line with the party line. So ways to counter this is we do not step into the box of whatever the label is on the bad side, and we want to ask questions in order to get to the truth. And we want to break the generalizations with an exception, and that can be in the form of a question. For instance, if we do have pro-vax scientists asking questions, are they anti-vaxxers? And obviously that can't be the case. So that will break the generalization that anyone asking a question is by nature an anti-vaxxer. So then what we have as the second rule is the rule of disfiguration. And this is the discredit in the opposition by crude smears and parodies. So effectively you'll see a lot of anyone that will say anything. And of course we're just showing how the propaganda works. We're not going to decide one side or the other. So anyone that will say anything, you'll notice that they will be labelled an anti-vaxxer, and they will be, a rant. It will be, be slammed. Will be a very common word, slammed, etc. Ludicrous, and you'll see this constant discrediting of anyone if they want to ask a question, valid or not. In fact, you'll get to the point with the simplification and the disfiguration that there is no valid questioning. You are basically not allowed to ask a question. And this is how propaganda works. It's to create this really uneven kill. Okay, so some of these are really telling in how the media is pretty much taking this simple, just slamming and disfiguration of anyone that will dare challenge the party line. And of course, the ways to counter is obviously to compile a list of the least disfigured experts and propose their questions. And really, if people have been successfully blacklisted, consider not using them as a reference, because what will happen is that the person you're talking to will just say that person is discredited. But they're going to struggle to blacklist everyone. So you just pick the ones that have the most credibility. So then we've got the rule of transfusion. Now this at first seems a little bit complex, but once you get it, it makes perfect sense. So effectively it's manipulating the consensus values of the target audience for one's own ends. So effectively it's taking the belief system and the emotional needs of the person and twisting them to meet your needs. For instance, it would be to the thing that they say, anyone that doesn't take a certain medical procedure is selfish. And since people don't want to be selfish, being branded selfish creates a lot of issues, and people will move towards obviously not being selfish. So you'll see this, labeled everywhere throughout the media, and there'll be certain labeling of emotion towards people which they do not like being called. So of course the ways to counter is obviously highlight the illogical nature with a series of questions or stories, and you can even reverse it. So, is it selfish to not question things? You really don't want to push directly against it though. Have it define itself and it will usually have no solid ground. People, if you try and argue the point as a conclusion, they're just going to, you're just going to go back and forth. So just have them define why someone is selfish, and then you'll find out they really don't know. So then we've got the rule of unanimity, which is presenting one's viewpoint as if it were the unanimous position or opinion of all right-thinking people. So it's the draining the doubting individual into agreement by the appeal of star performers, social pressure, and by psychological contagion. So exposure to misinformation could make people refuse, to take it. Scientists prepared rebuttal for letter to science on lab theory. So you'll see this lab theory was actually, was presented that all the scientists say that it is nonsense. And that was obviously a few months ago, because now most of the papers are saying the opposite thing. But in fact, they portray the argument as though it's very one-sided, and anyone that doesn't agree with this is a crazy person. And of course, you'll see the censorship actually allows this to really propagate very much, because people don't get to see many of the people challenging any of these points, because with the media and the social censorship on the social media, you only get to see one side, and therefore you think there's consensus. So ways to counter is find a way to have opposing view come into the awareness. Stories appear to be a good way. We can use court cases and Senate hearings, which will give the information credibility, and then people will find it very difficult to actually say that there isn't things that need questioning. And we can use the theme, we have to ask questions, it is important to do due diligence, and then people will really realize that they do have to ask questions. Avoid calling the mainstream media nonsense. You need to show them, don't tell them, because if you do use that term, they're likely to call you a conspiracy theorist, because that's what they think conspiracy theorists do. Then we've got the rule of orchestration, and this is endlessly repeating the same messages in different variations and combinations. So you will see that one solution has been proposed as the only way out of this mess. And of course, this message was propagated everywhere. And if you talk to a person on the street, they will say these very words because it's been repeated multiple times. And of course, there is then the illusion again of consensus. And people say, well, it's our only way out. And therefore, they won't consider any of the other repurposed drugs or any of the other options. So, of course, the ways to counter is obviously orchestrate counter messages or gently show the holes in the logic. And you can tell counter stories that show those logical flaws. And, of course, if we look now at why we do see so much aligned propaganda, you can see that there is actually very few companies now, and those companies are obviously influenced by the corporations that own them. So whatever the goal of the corporation, you will generally see a trickle down of the propaganda of those messages into those media companies.